In the spring of 2019, construction workers arrived at the Old Keleti railway station in Budapest with a straightforward task: renovate the crumbling eastern wing that had been closed to the public for decades. The station itself was a relic of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, built in the 1880s, its grand arches and iron lattice work bearing witness to over a century of departures and arrivals, of reunions and heartbreaking goodbyes. But as the workers tore up the rotting floorboards in what had once been a waiting room, they found something that made them stop dead in their tracks. Beneath the wood, hidden in a shallow cavity that had been sealed over sometime in the 1940s, lay 9 small suitcases. They were covered in decades of dust and grime, their leather handles stiff and cracked with age. Some bore faded travel tags with names written in careful cursive. Others had been marked with chalk, simple numbers, like inventory in a warehouse. When the foreman carefully opened the first case, the crew fell silent. Inside were children's belongings. A wooden toy train, its paint chipped but still recognizable. A small teddy bear with button eyes, one of them missing. Hand-drawn pictures on yellowed paper. Crayon sketches of houses with smoke curling from chimneys. Stick figure families holding hands under a bright sun. There were letters too, written in Hungarian and German, some addressed to Mama and Papa, others never finished, the sentences trailing off mid-thought as if the writer had been interrupted. One suitcase contained a tiny pair of leather shoes, barely worn. Another held a child's winter coat, carefully folded, with a name sewn into the collar in neat stitching, Esther. The workers didn't know it yet, but they had uncovered something far more profound than forgotten luggage. These were not simply lost belongings. They were time capsules, fragments of lives cut short, voices silenced in one of history's darkest chapters. As historians and archivists were called in to examine the discovery, a haunting question emerged. Who were these children? Why were their most precious possessions hidden beneath the floor of a train station? And perhaps most troubling of all, where did they go after they left these suitcases behind? The answer, as it turned out, was buried not just in the ground, but in the painful history of Hungary during World War II. Between 1944 and 1945, over 500,000 Hungarian Jews were deported, most of them sent directly to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Many of those deportations began at this very station, Keleti, where families were packed into cattle cars and told they were being resettled to labor camps in the east. Parents were instructed to bring only the essentials, and so they packed small suitcases for their children. Comfort items, drawings, favorite toys, anything that might help them feel safe during the long, terrifying journey ahead. But somewhere along the way, those suitcases were taken. Whether confiscated by authorities, stolen by opportunists, or hidden by sympathetic railway workers trying to preserve something of the children who passed through, we may never know for certain. What we do know is this: those 9 suitcases remained beneath that floor for 75 years, waiting in the dark. Waiting to be found, waiting to tell a story that should never be forgotten. To understand what those 9 suitcases truly represent, we need to step back into one of the darkest periods in European history, the spring and summer of 1944. By then, much of Europe had already been consumed by the Holocaust. The ghettos of Warsaw and Lodz had been liquidated. Auschwitz had been operating its gas chambers for over 2 years. Millions had already perished. But Hungary, remarkably, had remained a relative island of safety for its Jewish population, protected, albeit tenuously, by the regime of Miklos Horthy, who had resisted German pressure to implement full-scale deportations. That all changed on March 19, 1944, when Nazi Germany occupied Hungary. Within weeks, the machinery of genocide was set in motion with terrifying efficiency. Adolf Eichmann himself arrived in Budapest to personally oversee the operation. New laws were enacted almost daily. Jews were ordered to wear yellow stars. Their property was confiscated. They were forced into hastily constructed ghettos, sometimes entire neighborhoods sealed off overnight. And then came the deportations. Between May and July of 1944, in just 8 weeks, over 430,000 Hungarian Jews were rounded up and loaded onto trains. Most of them were sent directly to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where the majority were murdered within hours of arrival. It was one of the fastest and most brutal chapters of the Holocaust, a genocidal operation carried out at industrial speed. The deportations were methodical, almost bureaucratic in their precision. Families were given notices to report to collection points, often schools or synagogues. They were told they were being resettled for labor in the East, that they should bring clothing, food, and essential items. Many believed they were going to work camps where families would stay together. They had no idea they were being sent to their deaths. Budapest train stations became the final thresholds between life and death. Keleti railway station, Játszavaros, Nyugati. These grand architectural monuments to progress and connection were transformed into departure points for horror. Families arrived with their luggage, their children clutching dolls and stuffed animals, parents trying to remain calm, whispering reassurances even as fear gripped their hearts. Witnesses later described the scenes: long lines of people, guarded by Hungarian gendarmes and German soldiers. The sound of crying children, the smell of sweat and fear in the cramped waiting rooms. And then the trains, not passenger cars, but cattle wagons, packed so tightly that people could barely move, with no water, no sanitation, nothing but a small barred window near the ceiling. One survivor, a woman named Judith Magyar, recalled standing on the platform at Keleti as a young girl. She remembered her mother kneeling down, fixing her collar, and telling her to be brave. She remembered her father holding a small brown suitcase, the one they'd packed together the night before, with her favorite book and a photograph of their family. She never saw that suitcase again. She never saw her parents again either. She was one of the very few who survived. For most, those train platforms were the last place they ever stood on Hungarian soil. The last time they breathed free air. The last time they were together as families. By the time the deportations from Budapest were halted in July 1944, partly due to international pressure and partly because the Soviet army was advancing from the east, over 500,000 Hungarian Jews had been erased from the country. Entire communities, generations, families, gone. And in the chaos of those months, amid the confusion and terror and theft, small things were lost, or hidden, or left behind. Things like 9 small suitcases, buried beneath the floorboards of a train station, carrying within them the last traces of children who never came home. When the archivists from the Hungarian Jewish Museum arrived at Keleti station to examine the suitcases, they came prepared with gloves, cameras, and documentation protocols. They expected historical artifacts. What they found instead were windows into souls. Each suitcase, when carefully opened, revealed not just objects, but entire worlds. Small, precious worlds that had been violently interrupted. The first case they cataloged belonged to a child named Erica. They knew this because tucked inside, wrapped in what had once been a white handkerchief, was a watercolor painting. It showed a garden with flowers, red poppies and yellow daisies painted with the earnest imperfection of a child's hand. In the bottom corner, written in careful letters, Erica, 7 years old, 1944. 7 years old. The same age children learned to ride bicycles. The age of missing teeth and scraped knees and boundless questions about the world. Beside the painting was a small notebook, its pages filled with arithmetic problems and Hungarian vocabulary words. Erica had been a diligent student. Her handwriting improved page by page, the letters growing more confident. On the last page, she had written a sentence in German. Ich will nach Hause, I want to go home. She never did. Another suitcase contained a wooden soldier, hand-carved and painted in the red and blue uniform of a hussar. The paint was chipped on one side, evidence of countless hours of play. Whoever had owned this toy had loved it deeply, carried it everywhere, invented stories and battles and adventures around it. There was also a small leather pouch with marbles inside, cat's eyes and cleries, the kind children traded in schoolyards. In a third case, they found letters. Dozens of them, some finished, some not. One was addressed simply, to Mama and Papa. It read, Dear Mama and Papa, they told us we were going on a train tomorrow. I packed my blue dress like you said and the doll Grandmama gave me. David is scared, but I told him we will all be together. I promise to be good and help with the little ones. Please don't worry. I will write to you when we arrive. With love, your daughter. The letter was unsigned. Either she never finished it, or the name was lost to time. But perhaps most haunting was what the archivists found in the smallest suitcase, one that had been marked with chalk, just the number 3 on the outside. Inside was a tiny pair of leather shoes, brown with small buckles. They were barely worn, the soles still smooth. Children's shoes from the 1940s were expensive, often saved for special occasions or passed down between siblings. Someone had packed these carefully, perhaps hoping the child would need them for synagogue, or for meeting relatives, or for whatever normal life they imagined awaited them at the end of that train journey. Next to the shoes was a cloth doll, its face embroidered with simple features, 2 black button eyes, a red stitched smile. One arm had been resewn, probably repaired by a mother's hands after too much loving had torn the seam. Children don't pack their own suitcases at that age. Someone had chosen these items, folded them with care, and placed them inside with the kind of attention that only love provides. There were also photographs. Small, passport-sized portraits that families carried as keepsakes. In one, a boy of perhaps 9 or 10 stared seriously at the camera, wearing a suit that was slightly too large, his hair combed neatly to the side. On the back, in faded ink, Benjamin, 1943. Another showed 2 girls, sisters maybe, standing with their arms around each other, both smiling. The edges of the photograph were worn soft, as if someone had held it many times, thumbs rubbing the corners while looking at those faces. As the team worked through all 9 suitcases, a devastating pattern emerged. These were not random lost items. They were not misplaced luggage or forgotten belongings from ordinary travelers. These were the possessions of children who had been deported. Children who had stood on that very platform, holding these suitcases, not understanding that they were standing at the threshold of annihilation. Children who believed they were going somewhere they could take their toys and paintings and dolls with them. Children who never imagined that within days or weeks, those cherished objects, and their lives, would be taken from them. The suitcases had been hidden, perhaps by railway workers who couldn't stop the trains but could preserve something of the children who vanished aboard them. Or perhaps they were confiscated and stashed away, forgotten in the chaos of war's end. Either way, they remained, waiting beneath the floor of Keladi Station for 75 years. Silent witnesses to names that were never called again, to childhoods that ended on a platform, to futures that were stolen before they could begin. After the discovery, historians at the Hungarian Jewish Museum and the Holocaust Memorial Center in Budapest began the painstaking work of identification. They cross-referenced the names found in the suitcases with deportation records, transport lists, and survivor testimonies. What emerged was not just a collection of objects, but a constellation of lives, brief, bright, and extinguished far too soon. Erica, the 7-year-old artist whose watercolor painting had been so carefully preserved, was traced to a family from the Budapest district of Ujlapatvaros. Her full name was Erica Weiss. Her father had been a pharmacist, her mother a piano teacher. According to transport records, the Weiss family was deported on June 16, 1944, on a train destined for Auschwitz-Birkenau. The journey took 3 days. 90 people crammed into each cattle car, standing room only, with a single bucket for sanitation. Many died en route from suffocation or dehydration. Those who survived the journey arrived at a place that defied human comprehension. Upon arrival at Auschwitz, families were separated immediately. A Nazi SS doctor would make a selection with a simple gesture, left or right. Left meant the gas chambers, usually within hours. Right meant forced labor, a temporary reprieve, though death was merely delayed. Children under 14 were almost always sent left. They were considered unable to work and therefore, in the cold calculus of genocide, worthless. Erica was 7. According to the records, she and her mother were sent to the gas chambers on the day they arrived. Her father lasted 3 months in the labor camp before dying of typhus. None of them ever saw Budapest again, but Erica's painting survived. Hidden beneath the floorboards of a train station, it outlasted the regime that tried to erase her existence. The wooden soldier belonged to a boy named Thomas Kovacs, age 9. Researchers found his name on a list from the Újpest ghetto, a neighborhood in northern Budapest where thousands of Jews had been concentrated before deportation. Thomas had 2 younger sisters, both under 6. The family was deported in late May 1944, part of the first wave. A survivor named Magda Klein, who had been held in the same ghetto, was interviewed years ago and recalled the Kovacs family. She remembered Thomas because he had tried to comfort the younger children in the ghetto by organizing games and telling stories. He was a brave little boy, she said. her voice breaking even decades later. Always trying to make the others laugh, even when there was nothing to laugh about. Thomas and his sisters were murdered at Auschwitz. Their parents were separated from them on the platform and never saw what happened. The father survived the war, barely, and spent the rest of his life searching for any trace of his children. He never knew that his son's favorite toy had been preserved, a small wooden testament to a childhood stolen. The letters, those heart-rending messages to parents, were harder to trace. Many were written in the hurried hours before deportation, when families were still together but sensing that separation was imminent. Some were found tucked into the linings of suitcases, hidden as if the children hoped their parents might somehow find them later. One letter, signed with the name Zofia, was matched to Zofia Blum, age 11, from the town of Kispest on the outskirts of Budapest. Her extended family had been prominent in the Jewish community. Her grandfather had been a rabbi. In her letter, Zofia wrote about missing her best friend, about wanting to bring her cat on the journey, about hoping there would be other children where they were going. Deportation records show that Zofia's entire family, parents, grandparents, 3 siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, were sent to Auschwitz on the same transport. Out of 17 family members, only one survived, a teenage cousin who had been selected for labor. After liberation, she returned to Budapest weighing less than 70 pounds, her body ravaged by starvation and typhus. She lived until 2003 and spent her final years giving testimony, telling anyone who would listen about the family that had been taken from her. She never knew that her cousin Zofia's letter had been found. Not all the children died at Auschwitz. Some were sent to other camps. One name, Agnes, was traced to a girl who had been deported to Bergen-Belsen in northern Germany. Bergen-Belsen was not an extermination camp like Auschwitz, but a concentration camp where thousands died from disease, starvation, and neglect. Agnes survived. Barely. She was liberated by British forces in April 1945, weighing just 42 pounds at age 12. She was so weak that she couldn't stand. Photographs from the liberation show skeletal children with hollow eyes, children who looked decades older than their years. Agnes eventually emigrated to Israel, rebuilt a life, married, had children and grandchildren. When researchers contacted her family in 2019 to inform them that a suitcase bearing her name had been found, her daughter wept. Agnes herself had passed away in 2008, but she had spoken often about that journey, about the small suitcase she'd carried, about how everything had been taken from her when she arrived at the camp. She never imagined that something of hers had been preserved, hidden away, waiting. Of the 9 suitcases, historians were able to identify the likely owners of 7. 2 remain mysteries, names illegible, or records lost in the chaos of war. But even without names, their stories are clear. They belong to children who were Jewish, who lived in Budapest, who were deported in 1944, who carried with them small pieces of home, of comfort, of childhood. Most of them never came back, but their belongings did, emerging from beneath the floor like ghosts, refusing to be forgotten, demanding that we remember. For 75 years, life went on above those 9 suitcases. Trains arrived and departed. Thousands of passengers passed through Keleti station every single day, commuters rushing to work, tourists consulting maps, families reuniting on platforms, lovers saying goodbye. The grand iron and glass architecture echoed with announcements, the screech of brakes, the rumble of wheels on tracks. The station lived and breathed, a living organism of motion and transit. And beneath it all, hidden under wooden floorboards in what had become a forgotten storage room, those small suitcases lay in darkness, untouched, unremembered, waiting. After the war ended in 1945, Budapest was a city trying desperately to move forward. The Danube bridges had been destroyed. Buildings lay in ruins. Thousands were dead, thousands more displaced. The country fell under Soviet control almost immediately, and for the next 45 years, Hungary existed behind the Iron Curtain. During the communist era, there was little public discussion of the Holocaust. The official narrative emphasized the suffering of all Hungarians under fascism, with little specific acknowledgement of the targeted genocide of Jews. Memorials were few. Survivor testimonies were rarely recorded. The deportation of over 500,000 Hungarian Jews became a footnote, a chapter many preferred to close. Kelady Station was repaired and modernized. New platforms were added. The eastern wing, where the suitcases lay hidden, was eventually closed off, deemed structurally unsound, outdated, unnecessary for the station's operations. It became a storage area for maintenance equipment, then simply an abandoned space, locked and forgotten. Trains continued to run on the tracks where cattle cars had once carried children to their deaths. But no plaques marked what had happened there. No memorials stood on the platforms. The station's history as a departure point for genocide was buried as thoroughly as those 9 suitcases beneath the floor. In 1989, when communism fell and Hungary began the difficult process of confronting its past, some memorials were finally erected. The Shoes on the Danube Bank memorial appeared in 2005, commemorating Jews who had been shot into the river by fascist militias. Holocaust education slowly entered school curricula. Survivors began giving testimonies more publicly. But at Kelady Station, nothing changed. Passengers walked over the same floorboards every day, unaware of what lay beneath their feet. The stories remained buried. The names remained unspoken. The children's voices remained silent. Until 2019, when renovation plans finally forced someone to look beneath the surface. When the construction workers made their discovery, it sent a shockwave through Hungary's historical community. Here, in the heart of a functioning train station, in a place thousands of people passed through daily, evidence of the Holocaust had been literally underfoot for 3/4 of a century. It raised uncomfortable questions. How many other stories remained hidden? How many other sites of deportation, suffering, and murder had been paved over, built upon, forgotten? How many times had people walked over history without knowing it was there? The discovery also highlighted something profound about memory itself. For decades, Hungary, like many countries, had struggled with how to remember the Holocaust. What to preserve, what to memorialize, what to teach. And here, buried beneath a train station floor, memory had preserved itself. The objects had waited, patient and silent, for someone to finally look. Today, if you visit Kelady railway station, you'll find a small memorial plaque near the eastern entrance. It's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Just a simple bronze rectangle mounted on the wall, with an inscription in Hungarian and English. It reads, "In memory of the Jewish children deported from this station, 1944. May their stories never be forgotten." The 9 suitcases themselves are now housed in the Holocaust Memorial Center in Budapest, displayed in a quiet, dimly lit room. Visitors move through slowly, reading the placards, looking at the artifacts behind glass, the watercolor painting, the wooden soldier, the tiny shoes, the letters. Many people cry. Some stand in silence for long minutes, unable to look away. Parents hold their own children a little closer. The room is never empty. There is always someone bearing witness. The trains still run through Kelady Station, just as they always have. But now, finally, the children's voices have returned. Not as ghosts haunting the platforms, but as memories given back their rightful place in history. They return in every school group that visits the memorial, in every researcher who traces a name back to a family, in every person who stops to read that bronze plaque and takes a moment to imagine the children who stood on that platform, clutching small suitcases, unaware that they were standing at the edge of oblivion. The station is no longer silent about its past. The floor no longer hides what happened there. And the children, though long gone, are no longer forgotten. Their suitcases, those small, heartbreaking artifacts of interrupted lives, have become something more than objects. They have become voices, testaments, refusals to be erased. And as long as we remember them, as long as we tell their stories, those children remain with us. Not as victims alone, but as individuals. As Erica, who loved to paint. As Thomas, who made others laugh. As Zofia, who missed her cat. As Agnes, who survived against all odds. As children who deserve to grow up. Who deserve futures. Who deserve to be remembered not just for how they died, but for how they lived. The trains keep running. But now, finally, we remember who was on them. There's a room in the Holocaust Memorial Center in Budapest where time moves differently. It's a quiet space, deliberately kept dim, with soft lighting that draws your eye to 9 small suitcases displayed behind glass. They rest on simple pedestals, arranged in a semicircle, each one accompanied by a small placard telling what little we know about its owner. Visitors enter in hushed groups, their footsteps muffled by carpeted floors. Children instinctively lower their voices. Adults read the placard slowly, sometimes twice, as if trying to absorb the weight of what they're seeing. It's not uncommon to see people standing motionless before Erica's watercolor painting, or tears falling silently as someone reads Zophia's letter to her parents. These are not grand artifacts of history. They're not the belongings of famous people or world leaders. There are no crowns here, no ancient relics, no treasures in the conventional sense. They're just the things that children loved. A painting, a toy soldier, a pair of small shoes, a doll with a re-sewn arm. And yet they speak with a power that transcends their size. Because every object in those suitcases represents a choice. Someone, a mother, a father, perhaps the children themselves, decided what to bring. What mattered most? What small piece of home and comfort could fit in a suitcase when you were told you could only take what you could carry? They chose a painting because it represented hours of careful work, of pride in creation, of a child's vision of beauty. They chose a wooden soldier because it had been a constant companion, a source of imaginary adventures, a piece of normalcy to hold on to. They chose letters because words were all they had left to express love, fear, hope, the belief that somehow, somewhere, those words would reach the people who needed to read them. They chose shoes because children grow, and good shoes are practical, and maybe, just maybe, there would be a future where those shoes would be needed. Every item was packed with love, with intention, with the heartbreaking human instinct to protect what matters most, even when protection is impossible. The museum doesn't try to make the display dramatic. There are no theatrical lights, no dramatic music, no multimedia presentations. The suitcases simply sit there, speaking for themselves. And somehow, that restraint makes them even more powerful. Because the truth is, these objects shouldn't be in a museum at all. They should have been worn out from years of play. The painting should have hung in a childhood bedroom, eventually taken down when Erica grew older and slightly embarrassed by her youthful art. The wooden soldier should have been passed to a younger sibling, then to the next generation. The letters should have been saved in a family album, read and reread, cherished as keepsakes of a difficult time that was survived and overcome. These things should have become family heirlooms, not museum artifacts. But they're here instead because the lives that should have continued were cut short. Because the futures that should have unfolded never happened. Because 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, were murdered for no reason other than who they were. The 9 suitcases of Budapest are more than historical objects. They are acts of defiance against erasure. The Nazis didn't just want to kill Jews, they wanted to erase them entirely. To wipe out not just lives but memory itself. To make it as if entire families, entire communities had never existed. They destroyed synagogues, burned records, and tried to eliminate every trace. But they couldn't bury everything. They couldn't find every hidden photograph, every secret diary, every suitcase tucked beneath a floorboard. And so memory survived. In fragments, yes. In incomplete pieces. But it survived. Those 9 suitcases lay in darkness for 75 years. But they were never truly lost. They were waiting to be found, waiting to tell their stories, waiting to restore names and faces to children who had been reduced to numbers, or worse, to nothing at all. Today, thousands of people visit the Holocaust Memorial Center every year. School groups come from across Hungary and beyond. Teenagers stand before those suitcases and see children not much younger than themselves. They see handwriting in the letters that reminds them of their own. They see toys that wouldn't look out of place in their younger siblings' rooms. And they understand, perhaps for the first time, that the Holocaust was not an abstract historical event. It was the murder of individuals, of children who liked to paint and play and write letters, of children who had favorite toys and inside jokes and dreams about the future, children who were exactly like them. The suitcases teach what textbooks sometimes cannot. They make the incomprehensible personal. They transform statistics into souls. One visitor, a teacher from Germany, wrote in the museum's guest book, "I have read about the Holocaust for years. I thought I understood. But standing in front of that small pair of shoes, I finally felt it. And I will never forget." That is the legacy of the 9 suitcases. Not just to inform, but to make us feel. To break through the protective numbness that large numbers create. to remind us that every single victim of genocide was a universe unto themselves, full of thoughts and feelings, loves and fears, quirks and dreams. The smallest traces of a life, it turns out, can speak louder than history itself. A child's painting declares, "I existed. I created beauty. I mattered." A wooden soldier insists, "I brought joy. I was loved. I had a childhood." A letter whispers across decades, "I was afraid, but I tried to be brave. I love my family. I hope for tomorrow." And those small shoes, perhaps most powerfully of all, say simply, "I should have grown up." As long as those suitcases remain on display, as long as their stories are told, those 9 children, and the hundreds of thousands who shared their fate, are not forgotten. They are remembered. They are honored. They are given back the dignity that was stolen from them. And we, the living, are given a responsibility to bear witness, to tell their stories, to ensure that the world never again forgets what happened when hatred was allowed to flourish unchecked. The trains still run through Kelly Station, but now we know what they carried. Now we remember who stood on those platforms. Now we hear the voices that were silenced. And in remembering, we ensure that those children did not disappear, that their lives, however brief, mattered, that their stories endure. 9 small suitcases, buried beneath a floor for 75 years, have become monuments, not of stone or bronze, but of memory itself. And memory, as it turns out, is the most powerful monument of all.